My name is Martha. I'm 70 years old. Last Saturday, I took a deep breath, fixed my hair one last time in the rearview mirror, and stepped out of the cab in front of the wedding venue where my son was getting married. I was wearing a soft blue dress I had picked out months ago, thinking it would match the theme he once mentioned when we still talked like mother and son. As I walked through the entrance, heart pounding, I gave my name to the young woman holding the guest list. She glanced at the clipboard, then looked back at me, confused. She flipped the pages again, lips pressing into a nervous smile, and said she couldn't find my name. I thought it was a mistake, so I calmly repeated my name. She looked again and shook her head. I remember my fingers tightening around my purse as I asked if she could double-check. Then I saw James walking toward us. He looked so sharp in his tuxedo, just like when he went to prom. My heart lifted for a second. Maybe he'd smile. Maybe this was just a misunderstanding. But when he reached me, he didn't smile. He frowned like I was a problem to fix. He leaned in, lowering his voice but not his disgust, and said I wasn't invited, that I knew this already. That this day wasn't about me. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just nodded and told him I understood. I turned around and walked out, the same way I came in, but with a quiet storm growing in my chest. I had raised this boy. I had given everything I had to make his life beautiful. And yet, he left me out of the most important day of his life. Why would a son do that to his own mother? I adopted James when he was just 4 years old. He was a quiet boy with big eyes and a way of holding onto my hand like he didn't want to ever let go. From the moment I brought him home, my life stopped being about me and started being about him. Back then, I worked as a secretary in a small law office. My salary barely covered rent and groceries, but somehow I made it work. I took on evening shifts at a diner and cleaned houses on weekends, just so I could keep food on the table and shoes on his feet. There were nights I came home too tired to stand, but seeing him asleep with his arms wrapped around that old stuffed dog made it all worth it. I never dated seriously after adopting James. Every man I met eventually asked the same question: why take on a child that wasn't mine? They didn't understand, and I stopped trying to explain. I had already made my choice. I wasn't just raising a son, I was building a future, one scraped knee and math test at a time. James grew up fast. He was smart, curious, and had a smile that made all the noise in my head disappear. I saved every dollar I could to send him to the best schools I could afford. There were times when I skipped meals just so I could buy him new books. When he needed braces, I took out a loan. When he wanted to join the robotics club, I picked up an overnight shift. I remember one winter, the heater broke in our apartment, and we spent nights wrapped in blankets, laughing and pretending we were camping in the mountains. That's what I loved most about him. He never complained. He made the struggle feel like an adventure. By the time he got accepted into college, I had 2 jobs and barely any sleep. I remember crying in the car alone the day I dropped him off. Not because I was sad to see him go, but because I had actually done it. I had raised him. I had carried him from a scared little boy in foster care to a confident young man with a full scholarship and a future. The day he graduated, I sat in the back row of the auditorium, wearing the same black dress I'd worn for years. I watched him walk across the stage and shake hands with the dean. My hands were shaking from the emotion. I cried the whole time, not because I was tired, not because I was old, but because, for a brief moment, I believed every sacrifice had been seen. I believed it had all been worth it. Things began to shift the year James met Ashley. At first, I was happy for him. She was beautiful, confident, well-spoken, the kind of girl any mother would be relieved to see their son bring home. But there was something in her eyes, something cold, that didn't match the polite smile she wore when she greeted me. She was never rude outright. It was always subtle. A comment about how I dressed. A question wrapped in concern that felt more like a warning. I remember one night, they came over for dinner. I made James's favorite dish, something I used to cook when we didn't have much. And he'd always say it reminded him of home. Ashley took one bite and set her fork down. She said she didn't understand how James could have grown up eating food like that. She smiled when she said it, but it landed like a slap. I looked to James, hoping for a glance of discomfort or maybe a soft defense. He kept eating, as if he hadn't heard, as if I wasn't even sitting at the same table. Later, it became little things. She once asked if my blouse was borrowed from a younger friend. Another time, when I showed up unexpectedly to drop off a casserole, she opened the door and said she wished I had called ahead, that they were busy planning their future. And every time, James would stand behind her with that same quiet approval in his eyes, nodding, agreeing, drifting. Calls became shorter. Visits are less frequent. I tried to pretend I didn't notice. I told myself he was busy, that love changes things. But the truth was harder to swallow. My son was pulling away, and he wasn't trying to stop it. The night they announced their engagement, I wasn't even told. I walked into a dinner thinking we were just catching up, and there she was, flashing a diamond ring, surrounded by her parents and siblings. Everyone clapped. I smiled, but something inside me cracked. A week later, James came to see me. He said they were planning a small wedding, just close family. He said it like it was nothing, like I would understand. I nodded, because I didn't know what else to do. I wanted to scream that I was his family, that I was the only reason he'd made it this far, but I stayed silent. And in that silence, I could feel everything we once had slipping away. I stood in front of the mirror that morning for longer than I'd like to admit. The soft gray dress I chose wasn't new, but it was elegant. I'd saved it for something special. And despite everything, I still believed this was that day. The taxi ride to the venue was quiet. I watched the city blur by, clutching my small purse like it held more than just my wallet. Maybe I thought it carried hope. Maybe I thought James would see me walk in and remember who I was to him. The moment I gave my name to the young man at the front, something in the air shifted. He checked the list once, then again. He looked up at me like he didn't want to say what he had to. My name wasn't there. I told him to check again. I was the groom's mother. Surely that meant something. But before he could answer, I saw James walking toward us. He looked polished, calm, like someone whose life had just begun. He didn't smile when he saw me. He didn't even flinch. He asked what I was doing there. I told him I came for his wedding, that my name must have been missed. He said no mistake had been made. The wedding was for close family. I told him I was his mother. He said that didn't change anything. Then, Ashley appeared. She looked like a bride from a magazine. Her eyes met mine for only a second, before she asked James what I was doing there. He said I was just leaving. I could have cried. I could have begged, but I didn't. I stood up straight, fixed my hair, and gave them both the smallest smile I could manage. I told them I understood. Then I turned and walked away without looking back. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because something inside me had just shifted. I wasn't broken. Not yet. But I was done waiting to be seen. They never knew who I really was. I let the world believe I was just a tired old woman scraping by to raise a boy on her own. I let James think the lights stayed on through prayer, and that college happened because of scholarships and goodwill. The truth is, I inherited quite a bit when my husband passed. Real estate, investments, a company I never talked about because grief made me retreat from all of it. I sold part of the portfolio and lived quietly. I wanted James to grow up without entitlement. I didn't want him to see money as a solution to everything. When he got accepted to college, I paid for everything: tuition, dorms, meals. I made it look like aid so he'd feel proud. I slipped payments into accounts, set up trusts, and co-signed every lease. When he graduated and couldn't find work, I pulled strings through an old friend who owed me more than a few favors. Even the apartment he lived in was mine. He thought it was owned by a generous landlord who never raised the rent. That generous landlord was me. Every month, I told the property manager exactly how to handle things: maintenance, parking, and even the dog policy. When Ashley insisted they adopt a puppy, I paid for that wedding venue, the photographer, the ring she wore. Ashley wanted a designer dress, and I made sure the boutique was told to offer her a secret discount. She never thanked me because she never knew, and I never asked for thanks. I wanted them to have everything. I just didn't realize that everything included a world without me in it. So, I started to pull the threads. I called the attorney who manages my estate. I asked him to pause all payments connected to James. I sent a notice to the property manager. The lease would not be renewed. I canceled the credit line tied to my name. Slowly, I began to take back every piece of the life I had built for them. They had chosen to forget me. Now, I was going to show them what life looks like, without a mother they thought they didn't need. I wasn't spiteful. I wasn't cruel. I was just done pretending I owed them silence. Let them meet the woman they thought they had outgrown. Let them learn the cost of cutting me out. I started with the house. The deed was still in my name, held quietly through a trust James never bothered to ask about. I filed the paperwork to reclaim possession and gave the property manager 30 days' notice to inform the tenants that their lease would not be renewed. Next, I reviewed the loans. Every co-signed agreement, every favor disguised as opportunity, I called them one by one. I explained that I was no longer responsible for any outstanding balances. James would have to refinance. Ashley would have to step up. I wasn't backing anyone anymore. I contacted the firm where James worked. I didn't threaten or demand. I simply let them know I was withdrawing all sponsorship of the foundation that had secured his position. They were polite and understanding. They said they'd review his standing internally. I thanked them and moved on. The final step was the bank account. The one James used for emergencies. The one I kept quietly funded. Just in case. I emptied it and closed it out. I left nothing behind. Not out of revenge, but because I had nothing left to give. When James called, his voice was tight with panic. He asked if something was wrong. I told him everything was exactly as it should be. He said they couldn't afford the rent. I reminded him it was never his to afford. Ashley texted me after, accusing me of betrayal. I replied with one sentence. I've retired from motherhood. There were no more explanations, no more justifications. I had spent decades pouring every ounce of myself into raising a son who now saw me as disposable. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. For the first time in my life, I wasn't his mother, and I was finally okay with that. Ashley went online first. She posted a carefully edited video where she cried into the camera and said I had turned on them without warning. She said I sabotaged their wedding, took back their home, and left them broke out of spite. She spoke like a woman wronged, her voice soft, her eyes red. And the internet believed her. The comments poured in. People called me heartless. They said I was bitter, controlling, that I must have always been jealous of Ashley. They dragged my name through the mud without ever knowing it. I watched in silence for 2 days. Then I turned on my camera. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I started with facts. The wedding venue? Paid in full by me. The house? Owned by my trust. Her engagement ring? A custom piece I had selected through my jeweler as a surprise for James. I shared screenshots, invoices, voice memos, even a recording of Ashley bragging about how she would get everything in her name once the marriage was official. The video started slowly, but within hours it exploded. Comments flipped. Strangers apologized. Women my age flooded the feed with their own stories. But the real storm hit when Ashley responded with a live stream. She invited me to join. I accepted. It was just us on the screen. She came in swinging, full of outrage and shaky confidence. I sat there, calm, waiting. Every lie she told, I answered with proof. Every accusation, I countered with a quiet, factual response. I didn't call her names. I didn't gloat. I let her unravel herself. Then she said something she couldn't take back. She laughed and said I was never James's real mother anyway. That adoption didn't make me blood. That maybe if I'd stayed in my place, none of this would have happened. I didn't flinch. I looked straight into the camera and spoke for the last time. I may not be his blood, but I was there when he had nightmares. I was there when no one else wanted him. And I made sure he never went without a single thing he needed. I raised him. I fed him. I gave him a future. And if that's not real, then I don't want anything to do with fake. The stream ended there. Silence followed. But the internet wasn't silent. They knew who I was now. And so did she. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need revenge. I had the truth, and I let it speak for itself. They lost the apartment first. Without my trust covering rent, the eviction came fast. Then James lost his job when the foundation sponsorship disappeared. Ashley tried to keep up appearances online, but brands started pulling out after the live stream. One by one, the lies caught up with them. I heard from a neighbor that James had moved back in with one of Ashley's cousins. They were living in a spare room, sharing a bed with boxes stacked around them. James sent me a message after weeks of silence. He said he was sorry, that he missed me, that Ashley had gone too far. He asked if we could talk, if I could help him get back on his feet. I didn't answer right away. I sat with that message for a long time. I thought about the nights I stayed up sewing patches on his jeans, the meals I skipped so he wouldn't feel poor. The wedding, he said, wasn't for me. The look in his eyes when he said I wasn't family. I finally replied with a sentence I had rehearsed in my head but never imagined I'd send. Disrespect isn't a mistake. It's a decision. And I don't forgive decisions like that. I haven't heard from him since. And maybe I never will. But I made peace with it. I gave him everything I had. And when he threw it away, I learned how to give something back to myself. My mornings are quiet now. I wake up when I feel like it, brew a cup of tea, and listen to the birds outside my window. There's no rush, no schedules, no one asking me for anything. And for the first time in years, I don't feel guilty about that. I joined a women's circle at the local community center. We meet twice a week to talk, to laugh, and sometimes to cry. Most of us are mothers. Some of us are daughters. All of us have stories of giving too much and being forgotten for it. It helps to be seen. It helps even more to be understood. I started painting again. I wasn't good at first, but I didn't care. I painted what I felt. Sadness, then silence, then strength. I hung the first piece in my living room, a swirl of gray turning into gold. I called it Becoming. I also volunteer at a shelter downtown. I teach budgeting classes to women starting over. Many of them are younger than I was when I adopted James. I tell them what I wish someone had told me. That love should never cost you your dignity. That giving is beautiful, but not if it empties you. I think about James sometimes, not with anger, just with space. I hope he learned something from all this, but I've stopped waiting for that to happen. My life is full, even with the ache of what could have been. I don't regret raising him. I only regret not choosing myself sooner.